Good morning. Good morning, all the participants of our wonderful marathon, the marathon dedicated to the reading and studying of the Holy Scriptures. It is also dedicated to for the benefit of the world. We continue studying the talk between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His disciple, which took place 5,000 years ago on this planet, on the holy battlefield, Kurukshetra. Kshetra means field, the field of activity. This wonderful talk took place 5,000 years ago, and it has been recorded by Vyasadeva Rishi. And by his mercy, we can also observe this conversation in our consciousness. It's beyond the time. Whatever time, whenever this talk, this Gita, which means the song which has been sung, the Bhagavad-Gita means the song of God. So whenever we read it or listen to it, it's always acute, because this creation of the Lord will always be acute. This knowledge is always acute. We would like to immerse even deeper. We want to know about the Lord, about His pastimes, about His home, about His disciples, and in order to be able to enter this transcendental abode, where the children of the Lord are not entangled by all the material things like getting old, ill, and death. So we need to obtain similar qualities to be able to enter this abode. We do not have these qualities yet. And while we are in the material world, it means that we have material qualities. We are the creators of our own soul, fate. And it's like getting one thistle with the help of another thistle. We need to help ourselves. We need to change our wishes and desires and aim at them at the Lord, and at one point of time we'll be successful, and we will be there and in the abode of the Lord. It feels like we went out for a walk and forgot about it, but in reality we do not have the wish to come back. And once we change our wishes, everything will come back to normal. So we continue reading the Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, which describes the meditation, teaches us how to focus, how to control our mind. Because meditation is first of all aimed at calming our mind, making it our friend. That's what we want to achieve. And in chapter 6, the Lord describes or tells his disciple how to do it. And we will continue having read the auspicious prayers.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So chapter 6, Srimad Bhagavad-Gita As It Is, with the purport by His Holiness A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Krishna Consciousness Movement. Dhyana Yoga. Continuation. We continue. Chapter 6, verse 16.
Natyashnatastu yogosti na chaikantam manashnataha na chati swapna shilasya jagrato naiva charjuna. O Arjuna,
Translation. There is no possibility of one's becoming a yogi, or Arjuna, if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Regulation of diet and sleep is recommended herein for the yogis. Too much eating means eating more than is required to keep the body and soul together. There is no need for men to eat animals because there is an ample supply of grains, vegetables, fruit and milk. Such simple foodstuff is considered to be in the mode of goodness, according to the Bhagavad-Gita. Animal food is for those in the mode of ignorance. Therefore, those who indulge in animal food, drinking, smoking, and eating food which is not first offered to Krishna will suffer sinful reactions because of eating only polluted things. Punjate tvagham papaye pachantyatma karanat. Bhagavad-Gita. Anyone who eats for sense pleasure or cooks for himself, not offering his food to Krishna, eats only sin. One who eats sin and eats more than is allotted to him cannot execute perfect yoga. It is best that one eat only the remnants of foodstuff offered to Krishna. A person in Krishna consciousness does not eat anything which is not first offered to Krishna. Therefore, only the Krishna-conscious person can attain perfection in yoga practice. Nor can one who artificially abstains from eating, manufacturing his own personal process of fasting, practice yoga. The Krishna-conscious person observes fasting as it is recommended in the scriptures. He does not fast or eat more than is required, and he is thus competent to perform yoga practice. One who eats more than required will dream very much while sleeping, and he must consequently sleep more than is required. One should not sleep more than 6 hours daily. One who sleeps more than 6 hours out of 24 hours is certainly influenced by the mode of ignorance. A person is in the mode of ignorance, is lazy and prone to sleep a great deal. Such a person cannot perform yoga. Translation. He who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Extravagance in the matter of eating, sleeping, defending and mating, which are demands of the body, can block advancement in the practice of yoga. As far as eating is concerned, it can be regulated only when one is practiced to take and accept prasadam, sanctified food. Lord Krishna is offered, according to the Bhagavad-Gita 9:26, vegetables, flowers, fruit, grain, milk, etc. In this way, a person in Krishna consciousness becomes automatically trained not to accept food not meant for human consumption, or not in the category of goodness. As far as sleeping is concerned, a Krishna-conscious person is always alert in the discharge of his duties in Krishna consciousness, and therefore any unnecessary time spent sleeping is considered a great loss. Avyartha kalatvam. A Krishna-conscious person cannot bear to pass a minute of his life without being engaged in the service of the Lord. Therefore, his sleeping is kept to a minimum. His ideal is in this respect is Srila Rupa Goswami, who has always engaged in the service of Krishna, and who could not sleep more than 2 hours a day, and sometimes not even that. Thakur Haridasa would not even accept prasadam, nor even sleep for a moment without finishing his daily routine of chanting with his beads 300,000 names. As far as work is concerned, a Krishna-conscious person does not do anything which is not connected with Krishna interests, and thus his work is always regulated and is untainted by sense gratification. Since there is no question of sense gratification, there is no material leisure for a person in Krishna consciousness. And because he is regulated in all his work, speech, sleep, wakefulness and all other bodily activities, there is no material misery for him. Verse 18. Translation. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The activities of the yogi are distinguished from those of an ordinary person by his characteristic cessation from all kinds of material desires, in which sex is the chief. A perfect yogi is so well disciplined in the activities of the mind that he can no longer be disturbed by any kind of material desire. His perfectional stage can automatically be attained by persons in Krishna consciousness, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9:4-18-20.
Mukunda lingalaya darshane drishau tadbritya gatra sparshenga sangamam granam cha tatpada saroja saurabhe shrimattulasya rasanam tat arpite padau harir kshetra padano sarpane shirokhrishikesha padabhivandane Kamam cha dasya natukama kamyaya yadhotama shloka janashraya ratihi.
King Ambarisha first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then, one after another, he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. This transcendental stage may be inexpressible subjectively by the followers of the impersonalist path, but it becomes very easy and practical for a person in Krishna consciousness, as is apparent in the above description of the engagements of Maharaja Ambarisha. Unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord, by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagements are not practical. In the devotional service of the Lord, therefore, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of the Lord. The senses and the mind require engagements. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for people in general, especially those who are not in the renounced order of life, transcendental engagement of the senses and the mind, as described above, is the perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad-Gita.
Который в Бхагавад-гите определен словом «юкта».
Verse 19.
Yadhadipo nivatastho nengate sopamasmrita yogina yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha.
Translation. As a lamp in the windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A truly Krishna-conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant, undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. Texts 20 to 23.
Yatro paramate chitam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyannatmani tushyati sukham atyanti kam yatat buddhi grahyamatimdriyam veti yatra na chaivayam sthitaschalati tatvataha yam labdhva cha param labham manyate nadhikam tataha yasmin sthito na dukhyena guruna pi vichalyate tam vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga samgitam.
Translation. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle, and after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yoga realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence, without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the supersoul, and the monists think this to be liberation, but they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualists, but in this verse transcendental pleasure, realized through transcendental senses, is accepted, and this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous component of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras,
В своих йога-сутрах 3.34 великий мудрец говорит: Пурушарштха шуньянам гунанам пратипрасавах кайвальям сварупа пратиштха ва читти шактирити.
This chitti shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called Kaivalyam by the monists, but according to Patanjali, this Kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheta Darpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or bhava maha davani nirvapanam. The theory of nirvana, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam 2.10.6, this is called svarupena vyavasthitik. The Bhagavad-Gita also confirms this situation in this verse. After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord, known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, Svarupena vyavasthihi, this is the real life of the living entity. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by the words Kaivalyam Svarupa Pratishtha Va Chitti Shaktir Iti. This Chitti Shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Anandamaya Bhaya Sat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. In the yoga system, as described in this chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi called Sampragyata Samadhi and Asampragyata Samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical researchers, he is said to have achieved Sampragyata Samadhi. In the Asampragyata Samadhi, there is no longer any connection with mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis, perfections in the process of yoga, are not perfectly situated. If yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection, as is stated in this verse. Persons, therefore, indulging in the make-show practice of gymnastic feats of siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing Hatha Yoga, Dhyana Yoga and Jnana Yoga, but there is no such problem in executing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending and mating. But a person who is in pure Bhakti Yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. His callous towards incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity and even the death of a most dear relative, but he is always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. As stated in the Bhagavad-Gita 2.14, Agama paino nityas tam titishasva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. Verse 24. 1.
Tyaktva sarvan asheshataha manasayvendriyagramam viniyamya samantataha.
Translation. One should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon without exception all material desires born of mental speculation and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute the practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for the rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says,
он непременно придет к намеченной цели. Рупа Госвами говорит: Утсахан нишчаят дхайрят тат карма правартанат сангатья гацато вритых шадбхир бхактих прасидхяти.
One can execute the process of Bhakti Yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. Upadeshamrita 3. As for determination, one should follow the example of the sparrow who lost her egg in the waves of the ocean. A sparrow laid her eggs on the shore of the ocean, but the big ocean carried away the eggs on its wave. The sparrow became very upset and asked the ocean to return her eggs. The ocean did not even consider her appeal. So the sparrow decided to dry up the ocean. She began to pick out the water in her small beak, and everyone laughed at her for her impossible determination. The news of her activities spread, and at last Garuda, the gigantic bird carrier of Lord Vishnu, heard it. He became compassionate toward this small little sister, and so he came to see the sparrow. Garuda was very pleased by the determination of the small sparrow, and he promised to help. Thus Garuda at once asked the ocean to return her eggs, lest he himself take up the whole of the sparrow, take up the work of the sparrow. The ocean was frightened at this and returned the eggs. Thus the sparrow became happy by the grace of Garuda. Similarly, the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga in Krishna consciousness, may appear to be a very difficult job, but if anyone follows the principles with great determination, the Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves.
Господь непременно придет к нему на помощь, ибо Бог помогает тому, кто помогает себе сам.
Verse 25.
Shanair shanair uparamit budhya driti grihitaya atma samstham manakritva na kinchit api chintayet.
Gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence sustained by full conviction, and thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara. The mind, being controlled by conviction, meditation and cessation from the senses, should be situated in trance or samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life. In other words, although one is involved with matter as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness.
Он должен думать только о том, как доставить удовольствие высшей душе. Этого уровня нетрудно достичь, если просто заниматься деятельностью в сознании Кришны.
Text 26.
Текст 26. Ято нишчалати манашчанчала астхирам татастато ниям яйтат атманева
Translation.
васаннает.
From wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The nature of the mind is flickering and unsteady, but a self-realized yogi has to control the mind. The mind should not control him. One who controls the mind, and therefore the senses as well, is called Goswami or Swami, and one who is controlled by the mind is called Godasa, or the servant of the senses. A Goswami knows the standard of sense happiness. In transcendental sense happiness, the senses are engaged in the service of Hrishikesha, or the supreme owner of the senses, Krishna. Serving Krishna with purified senses is called Krishna consciousness. That is the way of bringing the sense under control. What is more, that is the highest perfection of yoga practice.
Только так можно стать полновластным хозяином своих чувств, и только так можно достичь высшего совершенства йоги.
Text 27.
Текст 27. Прашанта манасам хенам йогинам сукхам уттамам упайти шанта раджасам.
Translation. The yogi, whose mind is fixed on me, verily attains the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. He is beyond the mode of passion. He realizes his qualitative identity with the Supreme, and thus he is freed from all reactions to past deeds. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Brahma Bhuta is the state of being free from material contamination and situated in the transcendental service of the Lord. Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param, Bhagavad-Gita 18:54. One cannot remain in the quality of Brahman, the Absolute, until one's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Manaha Krishna Padaravindayoha. To be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, or to remain in Krishna consciousness, is to be factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. Text 28.
Текст 28. Юнджаны вам садатманам йоги вигата калмашаха сукхена брахма самспаршам атьянтам сукхам
Translation.
ашнуте.
Thus the self-controlled yogi, constantly engaged in yoga practice, becomes free from all material contamination and achieves the high stage of perfect happiness in transcendental loving service to the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Self-realization means knowing one's constitutional position in relationship to the Supreme. The individual soul is part and parcel of the Supreme, and his position is to render transcendental service to the Lord. This transcendental contact with the Supreme is called Brahma Samparasha.
Такая трансцендентная связь со Всевышним определяется в этом стихе словом
Brahma Samsparsha. Text 29.
Текст 29. Сарвабхутастхам атманам сарвабхутани чатмани икшати йога юктатма сарватра самадаршанаха.
A true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. Indeed, the self-realized person sees me, the same Supreme Lord, elsewhere, everywhere. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A Krishna-conscious yogi is the perfect seer because he sees Krishna, the Supreme situated in everyone's heart as Supersoul, Paramatma. Ishvaraha Sarva Bhutanam Hrideshe Arjuna Tishthati. The Lord, in his Paramatma feature, is situated within both the heart of the dog and that of a Brahmana. The perfect yogi knows that the Lord is eternally transcendental and is not materially affected by his presence in either a dog or Brahmana. That is the supreme neutrality of the Lord. The individual soul is also situated in the individual heart, but he is not present in all hearts. That is the distinction between the individual soul and the Supersoul. The one who is not factually in the practice of yoga cannot see so clearly. A Krishna-conscious person can see Krishna in the heart of both the believer and the non-believer. In the Smriti, this is confirmed as follows.
Но человек, обладающий сознанием Кришны, видит Кришну и в сердце верующего, и в сердце атеиста. В Смрити сказано: «Ата татвачча матритват ча атмахи парамо харихи».
Ататвачча матритвачча атмахи парамо харих. The Lord, being the source of all beings, is like the mother and the maintainer, and the mother is neutral to all different kinds of children. The Supreme Father or Mother is also. Consequently, the Supersoul is always in every living being. Outwardly, also, every living being is situated in the energy of the Lord. As will be explained in the 7th chapter, the Lord has primarily two energies, the spiritual or superior and the material or inferior. The living entity, although part of the superior energy, is conditioned by the inferior energy. The living entity is always in the Lord's energy. Every living entity is situated in him in one way or another. The yogi sees equally because he sees that all living entities, although in different situations, according to the result of fruitive work, in all circumstances remain the servants of God. While the material energy, in the material energy, the living entity serves the material senses, and while in the spiritual energy, he serves the Supreme Lord directly. In either case, the living entity is the servant of God. This vision of equality is perfect in a person in Krishna consciousness.
И в том и в другом случае оно остается слугой Бога. Таким видением в полной мере обладает человек, развивший в себе сознание Кришны.
Text 30.
Текст 30. Йомам пашьяти сарватра сарвам ча маи пашьяти тасьяхам на пранашьями сачами на пранашьят. Путь Кришна пребывает всюду, и все пребывает в нем.
Такой человек также видит различные явления и предметы материального мира. He even lost to me purport. A person in Krishna consciousness suddenly sees the Lord Krishna everywhere, and he sees everything in Krishna, such a person may appear to see all separate manifestations of the material nature, but in each and every instance he is conscious of Krishna, knowing that everything is a manifestation of Krishna's energy. Nothing can exist without Krishna, and Krishna is the Lord of everything. This is the basic principle of Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is the development of love of Krishna, a position transcendental even to material liberation. At this stage of Krishna consciousness, beyond self-realization, the devotee becomes one with Krishna in the sense that Krishna becomes everything for the devotee and the devotee becomes full in loving Krishna. An intimate relationship between the Lord and the devotee then exists. In that stage, the living entity can never be annihilated, nor is the personality of Godhead ever out of the sight of the devotee. To merge in Krishna consciousness is spiritual annihilation. A devotee takes no such risk. It is stated in the Brahma Samhita 538. I worship the primeval Lord Govinda, who is always seen by the devotee, whose eyes are anointed with the pulp of love. He is seen in his eternal form of Shyamasundara, situated within the heart of the devotee. At this stage, Lord Krishna never disappears from the sight of the devotee, nor does the devotee ever lose sight of the Lord. In the case of a yogi who sees the Lord as Paramatma within the heart, the same applies. Such a yogi turns into a pure devotee and cannot bear to live for a moment without seeing the Lord within himself. Verse 31.
Bhajatyekatvam asthitaha sarvatha vartamanapi sa yogi mai vartate.
Translation. Such a yogi who engages in the worshipful service of the Supersoul, knowing that I and the Supersoul are one, remains always in me, in all circumstances. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A yogi who is practicing meditation on the Supersoul sees within himself the plenary portion of Krishna as Vishnu, with 4 hands, holding conch shell, wheel, club, and lotus flower. The yogi should know that Vishnu is not different from Krishna. Krishna, in this form of Supersoul, is situated in everyone's heart. Furthermore, there is no difference between the innumerable supersouls present in the innumerable hearts of living entities, nor is there a difference between a Krishna-conscious person, always engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, and a perfect yogi, engaged in meditation on the Supersoul. The yogi in Krishna consciousness, even though he may be engaged in various activities while in material existence, remains always situated in Krishna. This is confirmed in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.187 of Srila Rupa Goswami. Nikhila svapi avasthasu jivan muktah sa uchyate. A devotee of the Lord always acting in Krishna consciousness is automatically liberated. In the Narada Pancharatra, this is confirmed in this way. By concentrating one's attention on the transcendental form of Krishna, who is all-pervading and beyond time and space, one becomes absorbed in thinking of Krishna and then attains the happy state of transcendental association with him. Krishna consciousness is the highest stage of trance in yoga practice. This very understanding that Krishna is present as Paramatma in everyone's heart makes the yogi faultless. The Vedas, Gopala Tapani Upanishad 121, confirm this inconceivable potency of the Lord as follows. Ekopi san padudha yo vabhati. Although the Lord is one, he is present in innumerable hearts as many. Similarly, in the Smriti Shastra, it is said, Sarvavyapina samshayaha aishvaryat rupamekam suryavat bahudheyate. Vishnu is one, and yet he is certainly all-pervading. By his inconceivable potency, in spite of his one form, he is present everywhere, as the sun appears in many places at once. Verse 32.
Текст 32. Atmaupam yena sarvatra samam pashyati yorjuna sukham va yadi va dukham sa yogi paramo mataha.
Translation. He is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and their distress, O Arjuna. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One who is Krishna conscious is a perfect yogi. He is aware of everyone's happiness and distress by dint of his own personal experience. The cause of the distress of a living entity is forgetfulness of his relationship with God. And the cause of happiness in knowing Krishna to be the supreme enjoyer of all the activities of the human being, the proprietor of all lands and planets, and the sincerest friend of all living entities. The perfect yogi knows that the living being who is considered or conditioned by the modes of material nature is subjected to the threefold material miseries due to forgetfulness of his relationship with Krishna. And because one in Krishna consciousness is happy, he tries to distribute the knowledge of Krishna elsewhere, anywhere. Since the perfect yogi tries to broadcast the importance of becoming Krishna conscious, he is the best philanthropist in the world, and he is the dearest servitor of the Lord. Начатасман манушьешу кашчин би прия криттамаха. Bhagavad-Gita 18:69. In other words, a devotee of the Lord always looks to the welfare of all living entities, and in this way he is factually the friend of everyone. He is the best yogi because he does not desire perfection in yoga for his personal benefit, but tries for others also. He does not envy his fellow living entities. Here is the contrast between the pure devotee of the Lord and the yogi interested only in his personal elevation. The yogi who has withdrawn to a secluded place in order to meditate perfectly may not be as perfect as a devotee who is trying his best to turn every man toward Krishna consciousness.
Старающийся изо всех сил привлечь каждого человека к сознанию Кришны.
Text 33.
Арджуна увача, йо ям йогаствая проктас, самьена мадусудана, итасьяхам на пашьями, чанчалатват ситим стхирам.
Translation. Arjuna said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The system or mysticism described by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, beginning with the word Suchaudeshe and ending with Yogi Paramaha, is here being rejected by Arjuna out of a feeling of inability. It is not possible for an ordinary man to leave home and go to a secluded place in the mountains or jungles to practice yoga in this age of Kali. The present age is characterized by a bitter struggle for a life of short duration. People are not serious about self-realization even by simple practical means. And what to speak of this difficult yoga system, which regulates the mode of living, the manner of sitting, selection of place, and detachment of the mind from material engagements. As a practical man, Arjuna thought it was impossible to follow the system of yoga, even though he was favorably endowed in many ways. He belonged to the royal family and was highly elevated in terms of numerous qualities. He was a great warrior. He had great longevity, and above all, he was the most intimate friend of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 5,000 years ago, Arjuna had much better facilities than we do now. Yet he refused to accept this system of yoga. In fact, we do not find any record in history of his practicing it at any time. Therefore, this system must be considered generally impossible in this age of Kali. Of course, it may be possible for some very few rare men, but for the people in general, it is an impossible proposal. If this were so 5,000 years ago, then what of the present day? Those who are imitating this yoga system in different so-called schools or societies, although complacent, are certainly wasting their time. They are completely in ignorance of the desired goal.
посещая пресловутые школы и общества йоги, лишь напрасно теряют время, хотя и думают, что добились каких-то успехов. Они пребывают в полном неведении относительно истинной цели йоги. Текст
Verse
34.
34.
Чанчалам хи манах Кришна прамадхи балавадридхам тасьяхам ниграхам манье вайоривасу душкарам.
Translation. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna, and to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The mind is so strong and obstinate that it sometimes overcomes the intelligence, although the mind is supposed to be subservient to the intelligence. For a man in the practical world who has to fight so many opposing elements, it is certainly very difficult to control the mind. Artificially, one may establish a mental equilibrium toward both friend and enmity, but ultimately, no worldly man can do so, for this is more difficult than controlling the raging wind. In the Vedic literature, Katha Upanishad 1.3.3.4, it is said,
Atmanam radhinam vidhi shariram radhamevacha buddhim tu saradhim vidhi manah pragrahamevacha indriyani hayanahur vishayam steshu gocharam Atmindriya manoyuktam bhaktitiyauhar manishinaha.
The individual is the passenger in the car of the material body. The intelligence is the driver. Mind is the driving instrument, and the senses are the horses. The self is thus the enjoyer or sufferer in the association of the mind and senses. So it is understood by great thinkers. Intelligence is supposed to direct the mind, but the mind is so strong and obstinate that it often overcomes even one's own intelligence, as an acute infection may surpass the efficacy of medicine. Such a strong mind is supposed to be controlled by the practice of yoga, but such practice is never practical for a worldly person like Arjuna. And what can we say of a modern man? The similar used here is appropriate. One cannot capture the blowing mind, and it is even more difficult to capture the turbulent mind. The easiest way to control the mind, as suggested by Lord Chaitanya, is chanting Hare Krishna, the great mantra for deliverance in all humility. The method prescribed is Sa Vaimanaha Krishna Padaravindayoha. One must engage one's mind fully in Krishna. Only then will there remain no other engagement to agitate the mind. Text 35.
Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Asamshayam Mahabaho Mano Durnigraham Chalam Abhyasinatu Kauntiya Vairagyana Cha Grihyate.
Translation. Lord Sri Krishna said, O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The difficulty of controlling the obstinate mind, as expressed by Arjuna, is accepted by the personality of Godhead. But at the same time, he suggests that by practice and detachment it is possible. What is that practice? In the present age, no one can observe the strict rules and regulations of placing oneself in a sacred place, focusing the mind on the Supersoul, restraining the senses and mind, observing celibacy, remaining alone, etc. By the practice of Krishna consciousness, however, one engages in 9 types of devotional service to the Lord. The first and foremost of such devotional engagements is hearing about Krishna. This is a very powerful transcendental method of purging the mind of all misgivings. The more one hears about Krishna, the more one becomes enlightened and detached from everything that draws the mind away from Krishna. By detaching the mind from activities not devoted to the Lord, one can very easily learn Vairagya. Vairagya means detachment from matter and engagement of the mind in spirit. Impersonal spiritual detachment is more difficult than attaching the mind to the activities of Krishna. This is practical because by hearing about Krishna, one becomes automatically attached to the Supreme Spirit. This attachment is called Pareshanubhava, spiritual satisfaction. It is just like the feeling of satisfaction of a hungry man has for every morsel of food he eats. The more one eats while hungry, the more one feels satisfaction and strength. Similarly, by discharge of devotional service, one feels transcendental satisfaction as the mind becomes detached from material objectives. It is sometimes like curing a disease by expert treatment and appropriate diet. Hearing of the transcendental activities of Lord Krishna is therefore expert treatment for the mad mind, and eating the foodstuff offered to Krishna is the appropriate diet for the suffering patient. This treatment is the process of Krishna consciousness.
Это удовлетворение возрастает, и он ощущает новый прилив сил. Точно так же, преданно служа Господу, человек испытывает духовное удовлетворение, и его ум постепенно отстраняется от объектов чувств. Этот процесс напоминает процесс выздоровления больного, который находится под наблюдением опытного врача и соблюдает строгую диету. Слушание и повествование о божественных деяниях Господа Кришны – эффективное средство для лечения помешавшегося ума, а принятие пищи, предложенной Кришной, диета – необходимое страдающему пациенту. Таков процесс лечения с помощью метода сознания Кришны.
Verse 36.
Асамья татмана його душпрапа ити ме матихи вашьятманату ятата шакьо ваптум упаятаха.
Translation. For one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work. But he whose mind is controlled and who strives by appropriate means is assured of success. That is my opinion. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead declares that one who does not accept the proper treatment to detach the mind from material entanglement can hardly achieve success in self-realization. Trying to practice yoga while engaging the mind in material enjoyment is like trying to ignite a fire while pouring water on it. Yoga practice without mental control is a waste of time. Such a show of yoga may be materially lucrative, but it is useless as far as spiritual realization is concerned. Therefore, one must control the mind by engaging constantly in transcendental loving service of the Lord. Unless one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, he cannot steadily control the mind. A Krishna-conscious person easily achieves the result of yoga practice without separate endeavor, but a yoga practitioner cannot achieve such success without becoming Krishna-conscious.
Человек, обладающий сознанием Кришны, без особых усилий достигает результатов практики йоги, тогда как йог не сможет достичь совершенства, не развив в себе сознание Кришны.
Verse 37.
Текст 37. Арджуна увача аяти шрадха йопето йогаччалита манасаха aprapya yoga samsiddhim kam gatim Krishna gachhati.
Translation. Arjuna said, O Krishna, What is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes to the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain perfection in mysticism? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The path of self-realization or mysticism is described in the Bhagavad-Gita. The basic principle of self-realization is knowledge that the living entity is not this material body, but he is different from it, and that is his happiness is the eternal life, bliss and knowledge. These are transcendental beyond both body and mind. Self-realization is sought by the path of knowledge, by the practice of the eightfold system or by bhakti yoga. In each of these processes, one has to realize the constitutional position of the living entity, his relationship with God, and the activities whereby he can re-establish the lost link and achieve the highest perfectional stage of Krishna consciousness. Following any of the above-mentioned three methods, one is sure to reach the supreme goal sooner or later. This was asserted by the Lord in the second chapter. Even a little endeavor on the transcendental path offers a great hope for deliverance. Out of these three methods, the path of Bhakti Yoga is especially suitable for this age because it is the most direct method of God realization. To be doubly assured, Arjuna is asking Lord Krishna to confirm his former statement. One may sincerely accept the path of self-realization, but the process of cultivation of knowledge and the practice of the eightfold yoga system are generally very difficult for this age. Therefore, despite constant endeavor, one may fail for many reasons. First of all, one may not be sufficiently serious about following the process. To pursue the transcendental path is more or less to declare war on the illusory energy. Consequently, whenever a person tries to escape the clutches of the illusory energy, she tries to defeat the practitioner by various allurement. A conditioned soul is already allured by the modes of material nature, and there is every chance of being allured again, even while performing transcendental disciplines. This is called yoga chalita manasaha, deviation from the transcendental path. Arjuna is inquisitive to know the results of deviation from the path of self-realization. Verse 38. Translation. Almighty armed Krishna does not such a man who is bewildered from the path of transcendence fall away from both spiritual and material success and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are two ways to progress. Those who are materialists have no interest in transcendence. Therefore, they are more interested in material advancement by economic development or in promotion to the higher planets by appropriate work. When one takes to the path of transcendence, one has to cease all material activities and sacrifice all forms of so-called material happiness. If the aspiring transcendentalist fails, then he apparently loses both ways. In other words, he can enjoy neither material happiness nor spiritual success. He has no position. He is like a raven cloud. A cloud in the sky sometimes deviates from a small cloud and joins a big one. But if it cannot join a big one, then it is blown away by the wind and becomes a nonentity in the vast sky. The Brahmanaha Patti is the path of transcendental realization through knowing oneself to be spiritual in essence, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, who is manifested in Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. Lord Sri Krishna is the fullest manifestation of the Supreme Absolute Truth, and therefore one who is surrendered to the Supreme Person is a successful Transcendentalist. To reach this goal of life through Brahman and Paramatma, realization takes many, many births. Bahunam Janmanam Ante. Therefore, the supermost path of transcendental realization is Bhakti Yoga, or Krishna consciousness, the direct method.
Путем постижения Брахмана или Параматмы потребуется немало жизней. Бахунам Джанманам Анте. Таким образом, самый лучший метод духовного самопознания – это бхакти-йога или метод сознания Кришны, прямой путь постижения абсолютной истины.
Verse 39.
Текст 39. Итанме самшаям Кришна Четумархася шешатаха тват аньях самшаясьясья четанахюпа падьяте.
Translation. This is my doubt, O Krishna, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy this doubt. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Krishna is the perfect knower of past, present, and future. In the beginning of the Bhagavad-Gita, the Lord said that all living entities existed individually in the past. They exist now in the present, and they continue to retain individual identity in the future, even after liberation from the material entanglement. So he has already cleared up the question of the future of the individual living entity. Now, Arjuna wants to know of the future of the unsuccessful transcendentalist. No one is equal to or above Krishna, and certainly the so-called great sages and philosophers who are at the mercy of material nature cannot equal him. Therefore, the verdict of Krishna is the final and complete answer to all doubts, because he knows past, present and future perfectly. But no one knows him. Krishna and Krishna consciousness devotees alone can know what is what.
Кришна в совершенстве знает прошлое, настоящее и будущее, но его самого не знает никто. Только Кришне и его преданным, обладающим сознанием Кришны, известно истинное положение вещей.
Verse 640.
Текст 40. Шри Бхагавану Вача Партханай Веха Намутра Винашастасья Видьяте Нахи Кальяна Криткашчит Дургатим Татта Гачхати.
Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Son of Pritha, a transcendentalist engaged in auspicious activities, does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17, Sri Narada Muni instructs Yasadeva as follows.
Bhajanna pakvodha pate tato yadi yatra kva vabhadrama bhudamushyakim kovartha apto bhajatam swadharmatah.
If someone gives up all material prospects and takes complete shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no loss or degradation in any way. On the other hand, a non-devotee may fully engage in his occupational duties and yet not gain anything. For material prospects, there are many activities, both spiritual, scriptural and customary. A transcendentalist is supposed to give up all material activities for the sake of spiritual advancement in life, Krishna consciousness. One may argue that by Krishna consciousness one may attain the highest perfection if it is completed, but if one does not attain such a perfectional stage, then he loses both materially and spiritually. It is enjoined in the scriptures that one has to suffer the reaction for not executing prescribed duties. Therefore, one who fails to discharge transcendental activities properly become subject to these reactions. The Bhagavatam assures the unsuccessful transcendentalist that there need to be no worries, even though he may be subjected to the reaction for not perfectly executing prescribed duties. He is still not a loser, because auspicious Krishna consciousness is never forgotten, and one so engaged will continue to be so even if he is low-born in the next life. On the other hand, one who simply follows strictly the prescribed duties need not necessarily attain auspicious results if he is lacking in Krishna consciousness. The purport may be understood as follows. Humanity may be divided into two sections, namely the regulated and the non-regulated. Those who are engaged simply in bestial sense gratifications without knowledge of their next life or spiritual salvation belong to the non-regulated section. And those who follow the principles of prescribed duties in the scriptures are classified amongst the regulated section. The non-regulated section, both civilized and non-civilized, educated and non-educated, strong and weak, are full of animal propensities. Their activities are never auspicious, because while enjoying the animal propensities of eating, sleeping, defending, and mating, they perpetually remain in material existence, which is always miserable. On the other hand, those who are regulated by scriptural injunctions and who thus rise gradually to Krishna consciousness certainly progress in life. Those who are following the path of auspiciousness can be divided into three sections, namely, first, the followers of scriptural rules and regulations who are enjoying material prosperity. Second, those who are trying to find ultimate liberation from material existence. And third, those who are devotees of Krishna consciousness. Those who are following the rules and regulations of the scriptures for material happiness may be further divided into two classes: those who are fruitive workers and those who desire no fruit for sense gratification. Those who are after fruitive results for sense gratification may be elevated to a higher standard of life, even to the high planets, but still, because they are not free from material existence, they are not following the truly auspicious path. The only auspicious activities are those which lead one to liberation. Any activity which is not aimed at ultimate self-realization or liberation from the material bodily concept of life is not at all auspicious. Activity in Krishna consciousness is the only auspicious activity, and anyone who voluntarily accepts all bodily discomforts for the sake of making progress on the path of Krishna consciousness can be called a perfect transcendentalist under severe austerity. And because the eightfold yoga system is directed toward the ultimate realization of Krishna consciousness, such practice is also auspicious. And no one who is trying his best in this matter need fear degradation.
Неудобства и лишения ради того, чтобы развить в себе сознание Кришны, можно назвать совершенным йогом и подвижником. И поскольку высшая цель восьмиступенчатой йоги – обрести сознание Кришны, тот, кто усердно занимается этим видом йоги, также получает благо, и ему не нужно бояться падения.
Verse 41.
Текст 41. Прапья пунья критам локан Ушитва шашватих самаха шучинам шриматам гехе йога бхрашто биджаяте.
Translation. The unsuccessful yogi, after many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The unsuccessful yogis are divided into two classes. One is fallen after very little progress, and one is fallen after long practice of yoga. The yogi who falls after a short period of practice goes to the higher planets, where pious living entities are allowed to enter. After prolonged life there, one is sent back again to this planet to take birth in the family of a righteous Brahmana Vaishnava or of aristocratic merchants. The real purpose of yoga practice is to achieve the highest perfection of Krishna consciousness, as explained in the last verse of this chapter. But those who do not persevere to such an extent and who fail because of material allurements are allowed by the grace of the Lord to make full utilization of their material propensities. And after that they are given opportunities to live prosperous lives in righteous or aristocratic families. Those who are born in such families may take advantage of the facilities and try to elevate themselves to full Krishna consciousness. 42 verse.
Adhava yoginameva kule bhavati dhimatam hitadhi durlabhataram loke janmayat
Translation. Or, if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in the family of Transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly, such a birth is rare in this world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Birth in the family of yogis or transcendentalists, those with great wisdom, is praised herein because the child born in such a family receives a spiritual impetus from the very beginning of his life. It is especially the case of the Acharya or Goswami families. Such families are very learned and devoted by tradition and training, and thus they become spiritual masters. In India, there are many such Acharya families, but they have now degenerated due to insufficient education and training. By the grace of the Lord, there are still families that foster Transcendentalists generation after generation. It is certainly very fortunate to take birth in such families. Unfortunately, both our spiritual master, Om Vishnupada Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja, and our humble self had the opportunity to take birth in such families by the grace of the Lord, and both of us were trained in the devotional service of the Lord from the very beginning of our lives. Later on, we met by the order of the Transcendental system.
Где с первых дней жизни нас учили с любовью и преданностью служить Господу. Позднее мы встретились по воле Всевышнего.
Verse 43.
Текст 43. Татратам будхи самьогам лабхате паурва дехикам я тате ча тато бхуя.
Translation. On taking such a birth, he revives the divine consciousness of his previous life, and he again tries to make further progress in order to achieve complete success, O son of Guru. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. King Bharata, who took his third birth in the family of a good Brahmana, is an example of good birth for the revival of previous transcendental consciousness. King Bharata was the emperor of the world, and since his time, this planet has been known among the demigods as Bharatavarsha. Formerly, it was known as Labhritavarsha. The emperor, at an early age, retired for spiritual perfection but failed to achieve success. In his next life, he took birth in the family of a good Brahmana and was known as Jada Bharata because he always remained secluded and did not talk to anyone. And later on, he was discovered as the greatest transcendentalist by King Rahugana. From his life, it is understood that transcendental endeavors or the practice of yoga never go in vain. By the grace of the Lord, the transcendentalists gets repeated opportunities for complete perfection in Krishna consciousness. Verse 44.
Purvabhyasena te naiva hriyate hyavashopi saha jigyasurapi yogasya
Translation. By virtue of the divine consciousness of his previous life, he automatically becomes attracted to the yogic principles, even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive transcendentalist stands away above the ritualistic principles, stands always above the ritualistic principles of the scriptures, purport by Srila Prabhupada. Advanced yogis are not very much attracted to the rituals of the scriptures, but they automatically become attracted to the yoga principles, which can elevate them to complete Krishna consciousness, the highest yoga perfection. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 3.33.7, such disregard of Vedic rituals by the advanced transcendentalist is explained as follows.
Vartate nama tubhyam te pusta paste juhu sasnurarya brahmanu chutnama grinanti.
O my Lord, persons who chant the holy names of your Lordship are far, far advanced in spiritual life, even if born in families of dog-eaters. Such chanters have undoubtedly performed all kinds of austerities and sacrifices, bathed in all sacred places and finished all spiritual studies. The famous example of this was presented by Lord Chaitanya, who accepted Thakura Haridasa as one of his most important disciples. Although Thakura Haridasa happened to take birth in a Muslim family, he was elevated to the post of Namacharya by Lord Chaitanya due to his rigidly attended principle of chanting 300,000 holy names of the Lord daily. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And because he chanted the holy names of the Lord constantly, it is understood that in his previous life he must have passed through all ritualistic methods of the Vedas, known as Shabda Brahma. Unless therefore one is purified, one cannot take to the principles of Krishna consciousness or become engaged in chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna.
Другими словами, до тех пор, пока человек не очистится, он не сможет встать на путь сознания Кришны и начать повторять святые имена Господа.
Verse 45.
Текст 45. Праятнат ятаманасту йоги самшуддха килбишахам анека джанма самсидхас.
Translation. And when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately achieving perfection after many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A person born in a particularly righteous, aristocratic or sacred family becomes conscious of his favorable condition for executing yoga practice. With determination, therefore, he begins his unfinished task, and thus he completely cleanses himself of all material contaminations. Once he is finally free from all contaminations, he attains the supreme perfection, Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is the perfect stage of being freed of all contamination. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad-Gita 7.28.
Это подтверждается в Бхагавад-гите 7.28. Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam dridha.
After many births of executing pious activities, then one is completely freed from all contaminations and from all illusory dualities. One becomes engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord.
Иллюзорной двойственности, тогда он с решимостью посвящает себя трансцендентному любовному служению Господу. Текст 46. Тапасви бхьо дхико йоги гьяни бхьо пимато дхикаха карми бхьяш чадхико йоги
Translation: a yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When we speak of yoga, we refer to linking our consciousness with the Supreme Absolute Truth. Such a process is named differently by various practitioners in terms of the particular method adopted. When the linking process is predominantly in fruitive activities, it is called karma yoga. When it is predominantly empirical, it is called jnana yoga. And when it is predominantly in a devotional relationship with the Supreme Lord, it is called bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga, or Krishna consciousness, is the ultimate perfection of all yogas and will be explained in the next verse. The Lord has confirmed herein the superiority of yoga, but he has not mentioned that it is better than Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is full spiritual knowledge, and therefore nothing can excel it. Asceticism without self-knowledge is imperfect. Empiric knowledge without surrender to the Supreme Lord is also imperfect. And fruitive work without Krishna consciousness is a waste of time. Therefore, the most highly praised form of yoga performance mentioned here is Bhakti Yoga, and this is still more clearly explained in the next verse.
Равно как и философские изыскания, которые не основаны на преданности Верховному Господу. Точно так же тот, кто занимается кармической деятельностью, не обладая сознанием Кришны, лишь напрасно теряет время. Поэтому самым лучшим из всех перечисленных здесь видов йоги является бхакти-йога. С еще большей ясностью об этом говорится в следующем стихе. Текст 47. Йоги нама писарвешам мадгатенда атмана шаддхаван баджате йомам.
Translation. And of all yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks only within himself and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word bhajate is significant here. Bhajate has its root in the verb bhaj, which is used when there is need of service. The English word worship cannot be used in the same sense as bhaj. Worship means to adore or to show respect and honor to the worthy one, but service with love and faith is especially meant for the Supreme Personality of God. One can avoid worshipping a respectable man or a demigod and may be called discourteous, but one cannot avoid serving the Supreme Lord without being thoroughly condemned. Every living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus every living entity is intended to serve the Supreme Lord by his own constitution. Failing to do this, he falls down. The Bhagavatam 11.5.3 confirms this as follows.
Каждое живое существо – неотъемлемая частица Господа и по природе своей предназначено для того, чтобы служить Ему. Отказываясь делать это, оно попадает в низшие сферы бытия. Это подтверждается в Бхагаватам 11.5.3. Я эшам пурушам сакшат атма прабхавам ишварам на баджантья ваджананти стханат браштах.
Anyone who does not render service and neglects his duty unto the primeval Lord, who is the source of all living entities, will certainly fall down from his constitutional position. In this verse, also the word bhajanti is used. Therefore, bhajanti is applicable to the Supreme Lord only, whereas the word worship can be applied to demigods or to any other common living entity. The word avajananti used in this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is also found in the Bhagavad-Gita. Avajanyanti mam mudhah. Only the fools and rascals deride the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. Such fools take it upon themselves to write commentaries on the Bhagavad-Gita without an attitude of service to the Lord. Consequently, they cannot properly distinguish between the word bhajanti and the word worship. The culmination of all kinds of yoga practices lies in bhakti yoga. All other yogas are but means to come to the point of bhakti in bhakti yoga. Yoga actually means bhakti yoga. All other yogas are progressions towards the destination of bhakti yoga. From the beginning of karma yoga to the end of bhakti yoga is a long way of self-realization. Karma yoga without fruitive results is the beginning of this path. When karma yoga increases in knowledge and renunciation, the stage is called jnana yoga. When jnana yoga increases in meditation on the super soul by different physical processes and the mind is on him, it is also called ashtanga yoga. And when one surpasses the ashtanga yoga and comes to the point of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, it is called bhakti yoga, the culmination. Factually, bhakti yoga is the ultimate goal, but to analyze bhakti yoga minutely, one has to understand these other yogas. The yogi who is progressive is therefore on the true path of internal good fortune. One who sticks to a particular point and does not make further progress is called by the particular name: karma yogi, jnana yogi, or dhyana yogi, raja yogi, hatha yogi, etc. If one is fortunate enough to come to the point of bhakti yoga, it is to be understood that he has surpassed all other yogas. Therefore, to become Krishna conscious is the highest stage of yoga, just as when we speak of Himalayan, we refer to the world's highest mountains, of which the highest peak, Mount Everest, is considered to be the culmination.
Гьяна-йогами, дхьяна-йогами, раджа-йогами, хатха-йогами и тому подобное. Если кому-то посчастливится сразу встать на путь бхакти-йоги, следует понимать, что он уже миновал все остальные ступени йоги.
It is by great fortune that one comes to Krishna consciousness on the path of bhakti yoga to become well situated according to the Vedic direction. The ideal yogi concentrates his attention on Krishna, who is called Shyamasundara, who is as beautifully colored as a cloud, whose lotus-like face is as effulgent as the sun, whose dress is brilliant with jewels, and whose body is flower-garlanded, illuminating all sides of his gorgeous luster, which is called the Brahma Jyotir. He incarnates in different forms such as Rama, Nrisimha, Varaha, and Krishna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, he descends like a human being as the son of Mother Yashoda, and he is known as Krishna, Govinda, and Vasudeva. He is the perfect child, husband, friend, and master, and he is full with all opulences and transcendental qualities. If one remains fully conscious of these features of the Lord, he is called the highest yogi.
И носит имена Кришна, Говинда и Васудева. Он идеальный сын, муж, друг и господин, и он исполнен всех совершенств и божественных качеств. Того, кто полностью сознает эти свойства Господа,
This stage of highest perfection in yoga can be attained only by bhakti yoga, as is confirmed in all Vedic literature.
Можно только идя путем бхакти-йоги. Ведические писания подтверждают это. Ясья деве пара бхакти, ядха деве татха гурау, тасьяйте катхитах ярдхах, пракашам.
Only unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. Shvetara Upanishad 6.23. Bhakti Rasya
Bhakti Rasya Bhajanam Tat Ихамутро падхи найрасье намушмань манах калпанам этат эва
Bhakti means devotional service to the Lord, which is free from desire for material profit, either in this life or in the next. Devoid of such inclinations, one should fully absorb the mind in the Supreme. That is the purpose of Naishkarmya. Gopala Tapani Upanishad 1.15. That means freedom or freedom from the consequences of activity. These are some of the means for performance of bhakti or Krishna consciousness, the highest perfectional stage of the yoga system. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 6th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad-Gita in the matter of Dhyana Yoga. So here we have been introduced to what yoga is, and this is the main scripture for the yogis. If we speak about Ashtanga Yoga, this is chapter 6. Apart from the whole scripture of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6 is the culmination of for Ashtanga Yogis or Hatha Yogis or all yogis. Bhagavad Gita is also being called Yoga Shastra. All yoga system is disclosed here. That's the main book for all yoga schools. The Bhagavad Gita is being recognized by all authoritative yoga schools. Chapter 7, Knowledge of the Absolute. Verse 1.
Текст первый. Шри Бхагавану Вача Майя Сакта Манах Партха Йогам Юджанмат Ашраям Асамшаям Самаграмам.
Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt." Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness is fully described. Krishna is full in all opulences, and how he manifests such opulences is described herein. Also, 4 kinds of fortunate people who become attached to Krishna, and 4 kinds of unfortunate people who never take to Krishna and are described in this chapter. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the living entity has been described as non-material spirit soul, capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different types of yogas. At the end of chapter 6, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yoga. By concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. Impersonal Brahma Jyotir, or localized Paramatma realization, is not perfect knowledge of the absolute truth, because it is partial. Full and scientific knowledge is Krishna, and everything is revealed to the person in Krishna consciousness. In complete Krishna consciousness, one knows that Krishna is ultimate knowledge beyond any doubt. Different types of yoga are only stepping stones on the path of Krishna consciousness. One who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about Brahma Jyotir and Paramatma in full. By practice of Krishna consciousness, yoga, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, the material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. One should therefore begin yoga practice as described in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, Tak Chrinu, or hear from me. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna, and therefore by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity to become a perfectly Krishna-conscious person. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart, puffed up with academic education. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this process is understanding of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows.
Процесс постижения Кришны, Верховной Личности Бога, абсолютной истины, описан во 2 главе 1 песни Шримад Бхагаватам. Шринватам свакатхах Кришнах, пуньяшравана киртанаха, хридьянтастохья бадрани, видгуноти сухритсатам, нашта праеша бадришу, нитям Бхагавата севая, Bhagavatyuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki tadarajastamo bhavah kamalabhadayaschaye chitta etar anavidham sitam satve prasidati ivam prasana manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavad tattva vigyanam Mukta sangasya jayate vidyante hridaya granhish chidyante sarva samshayaha kshiyante chasya karmani drishta evatmani.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad-Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of asamsyayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth Personality of Godhead. Bhagavatam 1:17-21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. Verse 2.
Текст 2. Гьянам техам савигьянам идам вакшьям яшешатаха яжгятва неха бхуйон ядж гятваям
Translation. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and numinous. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Complete knowledge includes knowledge of the phenomenal world, the spirit behind it, and the source of both of them. This is transcendental knowledge. The Lord wants to explain the above-mentioned system of knowledge because Arjuna is Krishna's confidential devotee and friend. In the beginning of the 4th chapter, this explanation was given by the Lord, and it is again confirmed here. Complete knowledge can be achieved only by the devotee of the Lord in disciplic succession directly from the Lord. Therefore, one should be intelligent enough to know the source of all knowledge, who is the cause of all causes and the only object for meditation and all types of yoga practice. When the cause of all causes becomes known, then everything knowable becomes known, and nothing remains unknown. The Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.3 say,
для него уже не останется ничего непознанного. Веды Мундака Упанишад 1.1.3 подтверждают это. Касмину Бхагаво Вигьяте Сарвамидам Вигьятам Бхаватити. Текст 3. Манушьянам Сахасрешу Качитья Тати Сиддхае.
Translation. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are various grades of men, and out of many thousands, one may be sufficiently interested in transcendental realization to try to know what is the self, what is the body, and what is the absolute truth. Generally, mankind is simply engaged in their animal propensities, namely eating, sleeping, defending and mating, and hardly anyone is interested in transcendental knowledge. The first 6 chapters of the Gita are meant for those who are interested in transcendental knowledge, in understanding the self, the supersoul, self, and the process of realization by Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and discrimination of the self from matter. However, Krishna can be known only by persons who are in Krishna consciousness. Other transcendentalists may achieve impersonal Brahman realization, for this is easier than understanding Krishna. Krishna is the Supreme Person, but at the same time, he is beyond the knowledge of Brahman and Paramatma. The yogis and jnanis are confused in their attempts to understand Krishna. Although the greatest of the impersonalists, Sripada Shankaracharya, has admitted in his Gita commentary that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his followers do not accept Krishna as such, for it is very difficult to know Krishna even though one has transcendental realization of impersonal Brahman. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, the primeval Lord Govinda. Ishvarah Paramah Krishnah Satchitananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govindaha Sarva Karana Karanam. It is very difficult for the non-devotees to know him. Although non-devotees declare that the path of bhakti or devotional service is very easy, they cannot practice it. If the path of bhakti is so easy, as the non-devotee class of men proclaim, then why do they take up to difficult path? Actually, the path of bhakti is not easy. The so-called path of bhakti, practiced by unauthorized persons without knowledge of bhakti, may be easy, but when it is practiced factually, according to the rules and regulations, the speculative scholars and philosophers fall away from the path. Srila Rupa Goswami writes in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.101.
На самом деле идти путем бхакти совсем нелегко. Легким может казаться так называемый путь бхакти, по которому следуют несведущие в этой науке самозванцы. Но когда философы, гьяни, пытаются заниматься бхакти-йогой по-настоящему, в соответствии с предписаниями шастр, они быстро сходят с этого пути. В Бхакти Расамрита Синху 1.2.101 Шрила Рупа Госвами пишет: Шрути смрити пуранади панчаратра видхим вина айканти ки харер бхактир.
Devotional service of the Lord that ignores the authorized Vedic literatures, like the Upanishads, Puranas, and Narada Pancharatra, is simply an unnecessary disturbance in society. It is not possible for the Brahman realized impersonalists of the Paramatma realized yogi to understand Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the son of Mother Yashoda or the charioteer of Arjuna. Even the great demigods are sometimes confused about Krishna. Mukhyanti Yatsurayaha Mam tu Vedana Karchana. No one knows me as I am, the Lord says. And if one does know him, then Sa Mahatma Su Durlabha. Such a great soul is very rare. Therefore, unless one practices devotional service to the Lord, one cannot know Krishna as he is, Tattvataha, even though one is a great scholar or philosopher. Only the pure devotees can know something of the inconceivable transcendental qualities in Krishna, his being the cause of all causes, his omnipotence and opulence, and his wealth, fame, strength, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, because Krishna is benevolently inclined to his devotees. He is the last word in Brahman realization, and the devotees alone can realize him as he is. Therefore it is said,
ибо Кришна всегда благоволит к своим преданным. Он высшая ступень осознания Брахмана, и воистину познать его могут только преданные. А так Шри Кришна Намади, на бхаве грахья индрияйх,
no one can understand Krishna as he is by the blunt material senses, but he reveals himself to the devotees, being pleased with them for their transcendental loving service unto him. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. Verse 4.
Текст 4. Bhumirapō nalovayuh khammano budhirevaccha ahankara iti amme.
Translation: Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, altogether these 8 constitute my separated material energies. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The science of God analyzes the constitutional position of God and his diverse energies. Material nature is called Prakriti, or the energy of the Lord, in his different Purusha incarnations, expansions, as described in the Narada Pancharatra, one of the Shattvata Tantras. Sattvata Tantras.
Vishnostu trinirupani purushakhyanyatho viduh ekam tu mahatas srashtri dvitiyam tvanda samshitam tritiyam sarvabhutastham.
For material creation, Lord Krishna's plenary expansion assumes 3 Vishnus. The first one, Maha Vishnu, creates the total material energy, known as the Mahatattva. The second, Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, enters into all the universes to create diversities in each of them. The third, Kshirodakashaya Vishnu, is diffused as the all-pervading Supersoul in all the universes and is known as Paramatma. He is present even within the atoms. Anyone who knows the 3 Vishnus can be liberated from material
Он
entanglement.
пребывает даже в атомах.
This material
Каждый,
world
кто
is a
постиг
temporary
этих
manifestation
трех
of one of the energies
сможет
of the Lord.
освободиться из материального плена.
All the activities of the material
Материальный мир
world are directed
—
by
это
these
временное
three
проявление
Vishnu
одного из
expansions of Lord
видов
Krishna.
энергии Господа.
These Purushas are
Всеми
called
процессами в
incarnations.
этом мире
Generally,
управляют три
one who
Вишну,
does not know the
экспансии
science of
Господа
God,
Кришны.
Krishna,
Их
assumes that
называют
this material world
пурусаватарами.
is for the
Те,
enjoyment
кто
of
не
the living
следует науке о
entities,
Боге,
and thus the
Кришне,
living entities are the
считают, что
Purushas,
материальный
the
мир
causes,
создан
controllers,
для того,
and enjoyers
чтобы
of the
живые
material
существа
energy.
могли
According to
удовлетворять
Bhagavad-Gita,
потребности
this
своих чувств,
the
и что живые
atheistic
существа
conclusion is
сами
false.
являются пурушами, источниками материальной
In the
энергии,
verse under
ее
discussion,
полновластными
it is stated
хозяевами.
that Krishna is the
Бхагавад-гита
original cause of the
признает это
material
атеистическое
manifestation.
заключение ложным.
Srimad Bhagavatam also confirms this. The
В данном стихе
ingredients
говорится,
of the material
что
manifestations
первопричиной
are separated
возникновения всего
energies of the
материального
Lord.
мира,
Even
Кришна,
the Brahma
это
Jyotir,
также
which is the
подтверждается в
ultimate goal of
Шримад-Бхагаватам.
the impersonalists, is
Различные
a
элементы
spiritual
материального
energy
космоса
manifested in the spiritual
являются
sky.
составляющими отделенной энергии Господа. Даже Брахма-Джьоти,
There are
высшая
no
цель
spiritual
имперсоналистов,
diversities in the
не
Brahma
что
Jyotir
иное, как
as there are
духовная
in
энергия,
the Vaikuntha
проявленная в
Lokas,
духовном
and the
небе.
impersonalists accept
В
this Brahma
Брахма-Джьоти нет
Jyotir as the
духовного
ultimate eternal
разнообразия,
goal. The Paramatma
которое
manifestation is
царит на
also a
планетах
temporary,
Вайкунхи,
all-pervasive
и все же
aspect of the
имперсоналисты считают
Kshirodakashaya
Брахма-Джьоти
Vishnu.
своей высшей
The
целью
Paramatma
и вечной
manifestation is
обителью.
not eternal in the spiritual
Что
world.
касается вездесущей
Therefore, the
Параматмы,
factual,
то
absolute
это
truth
временное
is the supreme
проявление
personality of
Кширадакашая
Godhead
Вишну.
Krishna. He is the
Параматма
complete
не
energetic
является вечным,
person,
ибо это
and he
проявление
possesses
Господа не
different
существует в
separated
духовном
and
мире.
internal energies.
Таким образом,
In the
высшее
material energy,
проявление
the
абсолютной
principal
истины — это
manifestations are
верховная
8,
личность Бога,
as above
Кришна.
mentioned. Out of these, the
Он
first 5
изначальный источник
manifestations,
всей
namely earth,
энергии,
water, fire, air, and sky,
и ему
are called the
подвластны
5
все ее
gigantic
виды,
creations
и
of the
отдельная
gross
энергия, и
creation, or the
внутренняя.
gross creations, within
Материальная
which the 5
энергия,
sense
как уже было
objects are
сказано,
included.
состоит из 8 первоэлементов.
They
Первые
are
5
the
из них —
manifestations of
землю, воду,
physical,
огонь,
sound,
воздух и эфир —
touch, form,
называют
taste, and
5
smell.
гигантскими или грубыми
Material science
элементами,
comprises these 10
в
items and
которых
nothing more.
заключены 5
But the other
объектов
3
чувств,
items, namely mind,
чувственного
intelligence, and
восприятия,
false ego, are
материальный звук,
neglected by the materialists.
осязательное ощущение,
Philosophers who
форма,
deal with mental
вкус и запах.
activities are also not perfect in knowledge
Материалистическая наука
because they do not know the
ограничивается
ultimate source,
изучением
Krishna.
лишь этих
The false
10
ego,
элементов,
I am, and
оставляя в
its
стороне 3
mind,
других
which
элемента —
constitute
ум,
the basic
разум,
principle of material
тревожное эго.
existence, includes 10 sense
Ученые,
organs for
исследующие
material activities.
различные психические
Intelligence
процессы,
refers to the total
также не
material
обладают
creation,
совершенным
called the
знанием,
Mahat-tattva.
поскольку им
Therefore, from the 8
неизвестен
separated
первоисточник
energies of
всего
the Lord
сущего.
are
Кришна,
manifest the 24 elements of the
Кришна,
material world,
ложное эго,
which are the subject matter
которое
of
проявляется
Sankhya,
в
atheistic
понятиях «я» и
philosophy.
«моё» и
They
составляет
are
основу
originally
материальной
offshoots from
жизни,
Krishna energies
включает в себя
and are
также 10
separated from
органов
him.
тела,
But atheistic
участвующих в
Sankhya
материальной
philosophers
деятельности.
with a poor
Слово
fund of
«будхи» —
knowledge do
разум.
not know Krishna as the cause of all causes.
Также указывает на совокупность
The subject
элементов
matter for
материального
discussion in
творения,
the Sankhya philosophy
называемую
is only the
Махататтвой.
manifestation
Таким
of the
образом,
external
из
energy of
8
Krishna,
элементов,
as it is described
составляющих
in the
отдельную
Bhagavad-Gita.
энергию Господа, возникают 24 элемента, из которых состоит весь материальный мир, и которые являются предметом изучения атеистической философии Санхи. Изначально эти элементы — порождение отдельной энергии Господа. Но приверженцы атеистической Санхи не знают, что Кришна — причина всех причин. Философия Санхи ограничивается лишь изучением различных проявлений низшей энергии Кришны, описанных в Бхагавад-гите.
Okay, we'll stop here.
Хорошо, давайте остановимся на этом.
I think we'll be reading 2 hours in the morning
Я думаю,
and 2
что мы
hours
по 2 часа будем читать утром,
in the
утренний
evening, not 2.5 hours.
блок, не по 2,5. Поправку мы потом сделаем с
Okay,
организаторами.
everyone have a good day. Feel well, be
Ну
well,
все, всем хорошего дня,
be enthusiastic.
хорошего самочувствия,
Let's
настроения
continue our
хорошего,
marathon.
энтузиазма, продолжать этот забег
See you soon.
нашего марафона. До новых встреч в эфире.